We posted a demo of the new Stealth GUI. People have been testing it on the test network, and we've gotten some feedback on there and have continued to fix a lot of loose ends there. We ran into a problem updating the assets. A serialization bug is preventing us from finally enabling the Stealth asset and transferring it to Once Upon a Time. Unfortunately, fixing the bug will require a hard fork. So rather than hard forking for that one issue, we're going to incorporate several different features simultaneously in an upcoming hard fork. Well, one of those is Abit's work on free transactions or coin days to pay transaction fees. That seemed to be something that was very much liked in the community. The other thing that we're going to attempt to roll out at the same time is the removing of negative voting. We can talk about the rationale for that in this Mumble session. It creates a security risk. It doesn't fully reflect voters' intention, and it causes a game of cat and mouse where you just keep going. Requires more voter activity. So we had this discussion in the past, and for whatever reason, I momentarily forgot why we shouldn't have done it when I designed the negative voting for workers. But we can talk about that in greater detail on this call. So what you can expect in the coming week is a new pre-release of BitShares that has ABITS changes, removes downvoting for workers, and fixes the issue with Once Upon a Time Stealth asset. So that's that. As far as the GUI, like I said, this past week we've been publicly testing the Stealth features, so you can all see that work has been done and is being refined. The major source of holdup right now is actually another feature, which is Stealth depends upon, but is not necessarily part of Stealth, and that is server-side hosting of encrypted wallet files. This will allow you to log into your wallet from any computer on OpenLedger. It'll mean you're automatically backed up, even if you're using the Lite wallet. These features are designed to make it easier for people and ultimately more secure, because you're less likely to forget your backup or delete something, or your browser cache gets lost. There's just so many things that can go wrong when users are entirely responsible for making backups of their data, in addition to remembering their password. So I apologize for the delays in the Stealth, but I think at the end of the day, we're actually delivering more features at the same time, and they all benefit each other in a form of synergy. So Stealth in particular depends on backups a lot more than other systems, because every time you receive a Stealth transfer, you get a transfer receipt, and if you don't save that transfer receipt, then you restore a backup, you won't have that money anymore. So we definitely need this feature as a part of making Stealth reliable. So the team's been working very hard on all that, and perhaps most importantly, a lot of this work is being done without any compensation from the blockchain. There's a little bit of money that's coming in from the support worker for that BlockTrades is hired as is going toward bug fixes and optimizations, not any new feature development. One of the complaints that we've had is that there's too much bandwidth required to stream data to the light client. The BlockTrades guys have implemented a compression on the WebSocket connection, which should dramatically reduce the bandwidth required on streaming the data. There's still work that we can do, and we have looked into on reducing the amount that we actually push. We more or less push every change, anything that changes during a block, we push on to the client so the client can update the user interface. Now, not all clients need all data. You don't need to know when someone else's account has changed. But for consistency and reliability of the user interface, we just push everything right now, everything that changes. We're still going to look into reducing that to just pushing what you need, and that will further reduce it. But in the meantime, the compression approach saves bandwidth. I don't have the exact numbers, but considering how verbose JSON is, I wouldn't be surprised if it saved over 50% reduction in bandwidth usage on the light client. So these are all positive developments for BitShares. So are there any questions about updates this week before I get into the sidechain issue and future stuff?
I have a question about Stealth. Now that the fees are down to 0 or close to 0, what is the initial fee for Stealth going to be set at?
My expectation is the Stealth fee will be what it was before, but you have to ask Once Upon a Time what he wants to set it at, because he paid for it.
This is Once Upon a Time. My understanding was the initial fee when you release it is going to be set at 3 times the normal transaction fee. Well, that ends up being 0, which isn't very helpful.
We're not hearing you, Bytemaster.
I was waiting for Once Upon a Time to speak up, because since he's here. My expectation is that the fee for a Stealth transfer will probably stay what it was before the BitShares fee reduction.
Apparently you didn't hear him. He did speak up, and in fact, he asked the question. He asked whether or not it was still going to be 3 times the normal transfer fee, but if that fee drops to 0 from ABIT's work, then that doesn't really help him very much, because that means he won't have any fees. That's what he just said.
Yeah, apparently my network connection is causing me to lose a lot of what all you're saying.
So you didn't hear me either?
I heard you more, but it's stuttering. Let me try to figure out if there's anything using my bandwidth right now. Anyway, the management account for the Stealth asset has complete control over what the fee will be. It's not set as a multiple of what the committee decides. So it can be whatever Once Upon a Time desires. I guess is the short answer. My advice there is you can't do free transactions with Stealth because the network doesn't know how many coin days you accumulated. So when you do a Stealth transfer, there will always be fees associated with it. So there will be no free Stealth transfers. So the changes by ABIT do not undermine Once Upon a Time's efforts. And I would guess that we'll probably keep the fee around 50 cents per Stealth transfer. But once again, that's not my call to make. We'll give Once Upon a Time the tools. If he wants to message me with any particular settings he would like us to initialize it to for him, we can do that as part of the setup process after the next hard fork.
I had a question about the backup, but I don't want to step on Once Upon a Time if he has a follow-up question.
Yeah, what will be the initial setting when the hard fork kicks in? Can you set it at the 50 cents for that, for the hard fork?
Yeah, I can set it to whatever you'd like.
All right, I'll message you.
I had a question about the backups that you mentioned, the server-side backups. Will that in any way prevent or change the nature of doing backups as they are now, just from your wallet's cache?
You'll be able to do both. Opting into server-side stuff, it's an option, it's not required. So there will be local use, local backups, as well as server backups. We will not make you dependent upon the server for your wallet.
Very good. That's excellent.
Well, KenCode just announced that BitShares wallet for iOS and Windows phones should be done by tomorrow and will be submitted to those app stores for approval. That's great news. I'm very excited to hear that. Apparently, the BitShares wallet for Android is currently available on the Google Play Store. Thank you, KenCode, for all your work on those efforts.
Yes, thank you, KenCode.
I have a question.
Sorry, Noisy, go ahead.
I have a question about Stealth, the GUI. On the forum, a lot of concerns were raised because we think that it's very difficult to use, and because Stealth requires a lot of attentions, because you can lose money if you mess up something. Did we actually figure out how to implement design this better? Because a lot of people says that this cannot be deployed with even without description. Without this description which Bytemaster provided, I cannot use it, and I think that I wasn't alone.
The challenge with Stealth is that what makes it hard to use is the fact that we require out-of-band communication between the sender and the receiver, which means when you send someone, you get a receipt, you've got to give them the receipt through email or Skype or private messages on the forum or something, so that it can import it into their wallet. It's a workflow that is more difficult by the nature that you're trying to be completely anonymous and private. There is a middle ground between complete stealth and being completely public, and that is where we only hide the amounts, but we don't hide who's transferring to whom. Well, what this would mean is you would be able to tell when someone transferred money to Polynix, but you wouldn't know how much money they sent. That middle ground is a compromised position, and it might, under that compromise approach, we could maintain a user experience that is very similar to what they experience today, and in fact, we could even make those transactions free as long as you have some public balance accumulating coin days. But it doesn't break the record.
The problem with that approach, Bytemaster, is that just by looking at the time of transfer, you could pretty quickly devise who, if you were looking to see how much somebody sold on Polynix, if you were the IRS or something like that, then you could just look at the timing of what disappeared on one network and what appeared on another. If you're looking for a person in particular spending habits, and you could deduce what they're doing with that pretty easily, I think. So I can understand why it's a compromise, but it's not really effective as a stealth measure in my view.
It's effective against different adversaries. and against different different needs. So we implemented the most robust stealth privacy mode that we could. That still works for light wallets. We had the stealth method under BitShares, which required everyone to scan every transaction. And we all know what a pain it was when you would spend hours scanning transactions for anything that might be yours. Now, that approach doesn't scale, so that's why we didn't adopt it here. And there's a third level where you can hide the sender, but not the receiver. Well, even then it's with timing attacks and whatnot, you lose a lot of privacy. So stealth is a feature for advanced users who are going to extreme lengths to maintain privacy. If you don't go to those lengths, and in fact, if you make it too easy, then people are going to screw up and compromise their privacy some other way. That said, there's always room for improvement in the user interface. There's a learning curve right now on doing stealth transfers, but I think the most important thing now is that it is possible. Now, I think that part of the problem is also that there were bugs that people have found in the stealth UI, and those bugs are being resolved and improved upon. So don't judge the final usability based on usability challenges during the test. We can look at ways of exposing this feature to more users, but right now, someone who wants and values stealth, they're the type of person who's motivated to learn how to do it. It's kind of like someone who values encrypting their email. We all know that it'd be better if all email was encrypted, but we also know it's a pain to configure encryption. There's all kinds of problems when your computer crashes and you lose your key. Now you can't read your old emails. People have experienced these problems, and that's why encrypted email hasn't taken off, despite the fact we all know the government and Google are reading everything you write. So I guess that's my point, is privacy is something you have to work for, and that's why it's hard.
Actually, my point was that right now the GUI is very misleading and actually provides 2 or 3 buttons at public account, at private account. And if I will find that without knowing anything about stealth, of course, I would like to have a private account. However, later I will have no information that this is potentially dangerous. So I just suggest to add more information about how it all works, and that it actually that this is actually a little bit dangerous for not advanced user. At least that.
Sure. We recognize that it's dangerous for advanced user, which is why you have to enable multi-account mode before you can even get those features in your wallet, which means most users won't even see that they can create multiple accounts or do anything that's not public. Now, from Once Upon a Time's perspective, he wants everyone to be using this feature. So there's a tension between trying to market and promote the feature for more and more people to use, and more people pay fees, and trying to not push something on people who aren't prepared to handle the responsibility.
I do have a more technical question about stealth. I realized that you can create private accounts which are registered on the blockchain with a address in the authorities. Can I also just extend an existing account to also have an address in the authorities? can I use a regular account for stealth as well, like upgrading a regular account into a private account?
The challenge is the authorities can have multiple keys, and stealth needs to encrypt things to a single key. But in principle, there is nothing that prevents the annotation of a public account with a public key. Right now, we've put together the bare minimum necessary to enable the feature, but it's a lot of work to give more and more options on these things. So we could use the memo key, but the memo keys are designed to be less secure. It's more read-only and not control funds. So obviously there's a lot of work to be done on this particular feature going forward. I can say that it's cost us more to implement what has been done already than we had estimated. So I guess Once Upon a Time is getting a lot of work for his money because we sort of underbid that contract. So it's going to be a lot of effort to continue to refine and improve it to make it as usable as can be. But of course, these are all good ideas. I appreciate the ideas on how we can improve it.
Well, couldn't we have some, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of stuff that might be able to be paid for by worker proposal if the community feels that that was a good idea, and if maybe once upon a time could come to some agreement. Is that something that you guys would be open to if possible? Seems like there's a lot of backing for stealth.
It has a maintenance account for further development.
For all further development?
Well, the idea was to accumulate some funds for further development and for advertising.
Well, and that's a great idea. The question is, if it doesn't seem like it's working out perfectly in practice, which is fine because that's how everything seems to work in life. But the question is, like, how could we come together to find solutions that might, I mean, unless you're completely cool with paying everything else if stuff comes up in the future. But it sounds like it's going over before we even have the implementation and you can even get money into that pool.
Yeah, there's an issue of the initial if there was a spec for the deliverable, then we could say, well, the CNX has implemented everything that was on the spec. Everything after this point will require funds from the maintenance pool once it's been accumulated to continue development or refinements of additional features or characteristics. But I don't think we really have a firm spec. Could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have a firm enough spec to say, hey, it's done now. Let's now start the maintenance aspect of it.
The spec we had was a walkthrough with all the GUI elements, which we have implemented very closely to what was on the original spec, as well as we have a detailed improvement proposal that outlines all the requirements for the backend change. So there is a very detailed spec on what it is that we're supposed to deliver for stealth, and the user experience and the workflow is very close to, we optimized it and improved it a little bit from the original spec, but it's at least as good as what we said we would do in the spec. So
that's good. That means it's just a matter of getting the bugs worked out of what's in the spec, and then I think it's a matter of funding the remaining development and refinements from the maintenance account. At least that's the way it makes sense to me.
So we can go through when we declare we're done. I'll outline and we'll publicly check off all the different things we said we'd do, just so that everyone can see that we delivered what we said we'd deliver. And for the money we said we do it for. So that's something that's very important to me to deliver on that, and that's what we're going to do.
Are there going to be stealth tokens, or is it just the like a feature that's going to go through BTS?
There's a stealth asset that gets all the transaction fees from stealth. It's a fee-backed asset you can buy, trade, and speculate on the value of stealth.
So hypothetically, there could be like a crowdfunder or something run, create some extra tokens if necessary to bring in extra, the cleaning up and all that stuff, or any of the extra stuff that comes up in the future.
Yes, theoretically, once upon a time, you can sell part of the stealth asset, take the proceeds to fund further development. All right, so let's talk about sidechains, since that keeps coming up over and over again. The first thing I'd like to say is that implementation of sidechains does not require any hard forks whatsoever of BitShares. Sidechains is fundamentally a dynamic multi-sig account that uses consensus, a consensus process to evolve who the parties are to the multi-sig automatically over time, and a consensus process to determine which things the parties to the multi-sig will sign. The implementation of the consensus process used by the signing parties is, hold on a second, lost my train of thought. It basically is a deterministic interpretation of the events on two or more blockchains. So you process the events from Bitcoin, process the transactions from Ethereum, and process the transactions on BitShares. You have a deterministic algorithm that determines at what point transactions on each network are deemed irreversible. And once a transaction on a particular network is deemed irreversible, the multi-sig members sign the predetermined transaction, the algorithmically determined transaction, and broadcast it on the respective network. Everyone is available to audit and verify that the multi-sig parties are signing the proper transactions. The only thing that this has as a security concern is the multi-sig members can collude to steal the entire value of a sidechain. Meaning, if Bitcoin were to become a sidechain of BitShares, or BitShares a sidechain of Bitcoin, depending on how you look at it, people will send Bitcoin to a multi-sig account that's controlled by the same keys that control the block signing on BitShares, the witnesses. The witnesses could collude to sign a transaction that transfers all the Bitcoin to themselves, and they could run away with it. That's very similar to any proof of work based mining, where the mining power on the sidechain, if you get 51% of it, you can completely steal all the value of the sidechain, because hash power is a proxy for a cryptographic signature. So this feature technology works really, really well with DPoS, because we've got a very trusted set of witnesses that are elected for their trust. They don't buy into it. So you don't have the moral hazard of, I'm going to buy enough mining power so that I can get 51% and then steal the entire bank account. That's not possible. You'd have to have a large enough stake in the BitShares system that you would be hurt tremendously by undermining the value of the sidechain, because you own so much stake in the BitShares system. So if you bought enough to control 51% and then you stole all the Bitcoin from everyone, the price of BitShares would fall by more than the Bitcoin you received.
So you would lose money on the deal.
Exactly. And that's what keeps things relatively secure. So DPoS is perfect for sidechains. So all that's necessary is to write a engine that combines the transactions from multiple blockchains. And then in processing and interpreting it from there. So that means we have to create a deterministic order of events that's global across 3 blockchains, which means we have to know which came first, the Ethereum transaction, the BitShares transaction, or the Bitcoin transaction.
It's necessary to look at more than one chain at a time, or can't you consider the events of one particular side blockchain, or like Bitcoin, for example, separately from those of Ethereum or any other side chain that would be added? Why do they have to be kind of considered together?
To the extent that the order of operations doesn't matter, you can consider them independently, but it's rarely a situation, at least it's easier from a consensus universal agreement point of view if the parties to this have a universal agreement on the order, because that means you have a deterministic interpretation of when things should happen, who should sign, what's the next transaction to be signed, and so on and so forth. For the sake of simplicity of implementing the consensus mechanism, all consensus mechanisms are fundamentally a deterministic interpretation of a defined order of events. Side chains are nothing more than defining the order of events among more than one blockchain, combined with signing authority that can prove basically testimony oracles, right? You have a multi-sig oracle about the status of another chain.
That makes perfectly good sense. So in my view, if we were to implement sidechains, and I happen to think it's a pretty good idea, we should do it slowly and chain and not complicate matters. We're trying to implement it with multiple other cryptos, so that we don't have an issue of bottlenecks the way you just described. Not bottlenecks, but an issue of collisions the way you're described. It just simplifies an implementation, and then we can learn from that, and as we implement that, to possibly make the addition of third, fourth, and however many else easier.
The nice thing about this is the only thing you really need to do to implement multiple sidechains in a deterministic order is to broadcast the block headers of Bitcoin and or Ethereum as transactions, custom operations onto the BitShares network. And if you broadcast the block headers and then you have it, because Ethereum and Bitcoin are proof of work, it's really easy to check that they link and to know which one's the current longest chain. All you have to do is define a constant that after it gets so many blocks deep, that block is deemed irreversible and becomes effective, and their transactions get processed and evaluated by the sidechain consensus algorithm.
How would the shift in Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake change the dynamics there, and would that be a complicating factor? That's why I'm suggesting maybe not implementing 2 side chains at the same time, but going forth with one first.
I believe that it's still possible to know what the Ethereum blocks are, even with their new consensus protocol. I don't expect that they'll be moving to proof of stake in any short-term timeline. There's still a lot of unanswered questions about their consensus process, that it's kind of in the design stage. I'd say that it would probably take them as long to move to proof of stake as it will for us to implement a sidechain protocol. Probably longer for them to move to proof of stake, but it's that type of an issue. That said, ultimately, it's possible to migrate the consensus of Ethereum or any network as basically oracles. People publish a block, multiple people sign it, and if the witnesses all agree that that was the block, then that's the block, right? So you can have the BitShares witnesses observing the Ethereum blockchain, and then after so many confirmations on Ethereum, our witnesses broadcast a block. They all confirm that, yes, that is the Ethereum block, and now we've got it. So it doesn't matter what their algorithm is. It works for any chain, Ripple, you name it. All we need to do is establish the order and an agreement on what the blocks were on the other systems.
Does it make sense? Does it make sense to have different set of witnesses approving these other chain activities, or do you think it makes more sense to have them included with the existing witnesses?
The existing witnesses are there's only so much attention that can be given to voting. So many people that the BitShares shareholders can vote on. So you only have trust in those parties. If you start having more people involved, you're going to have less trust and a higher probability of fraud or collusion in the other signers.
What will it do for the workload? Not what will it do for the amount of resources that the witness nodes need to have in order to this additional information? Will it really have a substantial increase in their footprint on the VPSs?
They would have to process every single blockchain. So it'd be the combined size of running an Ethereum node and a Bitcoin node, plus a BitShares node.
And what about all the knowledge with regard to the, I mean, since it's in our network, it's really a matter of processing BitShares. I mean, they're not BitShares per se, but they're on the BitShares network. So there's no protocol differences there. It's not like we have to learn Bitcoin protocol or Ethereum protocol to process the nodes. Is that correct?
Correct. We can use the API calls to their server, but we wouldn't have to implement their consensus algorithms, but we would have to run their full nodes and then use their APIs on our node to figure out which transactions our witnesses should be signing for those other protocols.
No, I am concerned from the standpoint that I mean, I'm just not sure yet that I understand fully from the standpoint of the footprint and memory requirements. But since we've learned an awful lot about how onerous some of these other methodologies and algorithms are for processing blocks, we've got a very optimized and high performance way of processing blocks. I want to make sure we don't bog that down with the processing of these other coins on our network. Now, it's not really other coins on our network, but you get my point. It's a matter of if the volume increases as substantially, if there's a whole lot more accounts, for example, we know that the number of accounts does have a direct impact on the memory footprint, for example. So it's a matter of knowing after sidechains are implemented for, let's just say, Bitcoin, that we know what to anticipate in terms of resources and scaling up of our infrastructure to accommodate the sidechain.
Sure. So sidechains are like threads. They don't monopolize the same CPU as the main BitShares thing. And you can run a full BitShares node without having to run all the sidechain nodes. The only time you'd have to have a server that runs all three networks is if you're a signing witness. And even then, you don't necessarily have to run them on the same machine. It's entirely possible that you can use light clients to talk to the Ethereum or the Bitcoin network. So
there's like a separate witness node, so to speak, that would handle the transactions from the side chain, as opposed to it being a combined witness that handles all of them, is what you're suggesting.
Correct. There'd be a separate process that a witness can run. It won't even be in the same witness node that would talk to two or more blockchains and generate transactions and sign transactions based on what it sees on those blockchains.
Thank you. I understand now. That makes more sense indeed.
So,
like I said, this can be implemented without hard forking or changing BitShares in any way.
Do these witnesses need to be block producers at all?
They do not.
So it could be any set of accounts that just run a witness node, like a full node, monitor the BitShares node, monitor the BitShares blockchain and the other chain, and then do the transaction stuff. It's not really required to be a witness in your case.
Except for the voting issues and the fact that if you did, that's kind of why I asked the earlier question about separate witnesses. Because what you're alluding to, Xerox, is that you could have a separate set of people that did this process, but then you would have no accountability if they didn't have witness voting and all that kind of stuff behind them.
You can have a different set of people owning a account, different from the set of actually using that account, simply by using owner authorities and active authorities. If the active authority kind of deals wrongly or fucks up with the situation, they can be replaced by the owner authority.
In such a case, witnesses would have the ability to delegate to other people. And it's also possible that you just trust a couple of very public, well-known people as much as you would trust the witnesses, right? All that matters is that you trust the backer of the UIAs in play, right? Basically, you're saying, let's find 5, 10, 20 people that are going to back a UIA, and they're all going to agree on which transactions they will sign based on a deterministic algorithm processing 2 or more blockchains. Currently, you trust it with a single person signing it for open ledger or a trade, block trades. All you're really doing is say, well, suppose block trades upgraded their security to do multi-sig, and then suppose they made sure that the parties to the multi-sig were located in different jurisdictions and that they did not have incentive to collude. You would feel a lot more confident that the balances held by block trades were secure. And trust is not something that we should try to eliminate. We should try to strengthen it, make it easier to trust, rather than saying you don't have to trust.
I totally agree.
Because trust gives efficiency. So, several things here. as far as funding side chains, this can be done by anyone or any group of people. And if you fund it and you build it and people trust it and they value the increased level of trust they have in you, more people will trade your asset than they will something that's solely backed by block trades or open ledger. And so you can therefore finance the funding of all this like you would finance any exchange. You use the transaction fees generated by the UIA trading, the market fees, to reimburse the investors in the sidechain effort. So if there is a substantial demand to invest in sidechain technology, the people to do it would be block trades, because they already have code that knows how to monitor Ethereum and Bitcoin and BitShares. All they need to do is take their deposit and withdrawal consensus algorithm, deposit withdrawal processing algorithm, and move it to a state machine that operates upon consensus rather than just having one server decide what to do. Have end servers determine what to do, and then add a little bit of communication between them so that they can all sign off on the same transaction. If there's funding available for that and there's interest in that, then we can really start to pursue it. I don't know how long it would take, but if I had to guess, a couple months to implement it.
Would you mind walking through a typical use case for sidechains?
If you understand block trades and open ledger, as far as open USD, open BTC, it's the exact same use case as those. It's just you're increasing the security of the assets held. So the use case is preventing your exchange or the backing of a token from getting hacked.
Thanks.
Would that cause the disappearance of open BTC and trade BTC, for example, for the Bitcoin assets?
If this was implemented, then there would be a side BTC or something like that. And then the market would have to determine whether they want to trust open, trade, or side.
Now, from a user standpoint, a brand new user coming into the ecosystem and they see all these variations of BTC, why would they choose one over another?
So what I would expect would happen is if this was implemented, open ledger and trade and block trades would probably join side and discontinue theirs, because network effects would mean that they'd make more by getting a percentage of the trading fees from the combined multi-sig authority than they would by trying to compete in separate side markets.
What do you think that we're going to be looking at in terms of, well, there's two questions. In terms of money to get this done, and also to Plasma and Pactum, these were similar ideas that would accomplish something somewhat similar to side chains. What are your thoughts on that? Is side chain still likely one of the better options?
Yeah, Plasma was all about defining a deterministically globally accepted order of events and separating out the interpretation of the events from the ordering of events. So any system that can help with determining the order of events among two or more blockchains by doing something as simple as publishing the block headers from all blockchains to one trusted source could have a dramatic impact. Imagine there's a blockchain where all block headers from all other blockchains are published, and you wrote software that read that blockchain and fetched the blocks and pushed just those blocks into the individual local nodes, so that they're not getting their state from the respective peer-to-peer networks, but from the chain that has the headers of all of them. Then you'll guaranteed that the state of each of your local nodes is in sync, and you have a consistent view of the world with respect to the global ordering. Now, you could do the exact same thing on BitShares just by publishing that stuff to the BitShares blockchain with the custom operation. So, custom operation on BitShares does everything Plasma
But these are
would
fundamentally
have done.
two different things, really,
Yes,
in the way that they do it.
correct.
So both of these features could kind of coexist as I'm seeing it.
Correct.
Thank you for your clarification on that. And another question would be, is the side chain, do you think, the most low-hanging fruit, and how much would you suspect, from what you've learned in your experience in this area, how much are we looking at as a general guesstimate to have something like side chains implemented? Would it be something that has to be implemented individually for each token, I'm assuming, that we want to bring on? And what are you looking for each token as far as how much time and effort and money would go into something like that?
I'm not the person to make those estimates because I don't know the code from block trades. They're a separate company with a code base that I've never seen.
Sure.
So from that perspective, they'd have to provide an estimate on what they think it would cost to develop. As far as the value of side chains, there's a lot of marketing hype around Bitcoin side chains. So just claiming that you are a side chain of Bitcoin causes more people to look at you. So if we could claim that, that would be, it might have marketing value that completely justifies the cost of funding it, even if it's never used. But that's a judgment call of whether or not being able to claim that matters. It would create a perfect peg. It would make BitShares just as reliable, or more reliable than any other centralized exchange in terms of the deposits. That said, most centralized exchanges have gotten very good about guarding their deposits in cold wallets and multi-sig and stuff. So in a way, every exchange is already their own mini sidechain bridge, privatized blockchain, if you will. So the challenge for BitShares is to identify market segments that we can serve better than the centralized exchanges. It's not just enough to be as good as they are. We've got to serve our customers better. So what would serve our customers better than the current exchanges?
One thing that comes to mind is that if we did implement a Bitcoin sidechain and look at the problems that they've had recently with regard to unconfirmed transactions because of the backlog, they could see that our assets trade quickly and without delay, whereas those assets would be hung up, and that would be in one exchange. They could see that within our exchange. So that would highlight a difference of performance of one coin over another directly and easily.
Well, within a particular exchange, if you view each exchange as a blockchain, as a private blockchain, which if they're doing their job right, their code should be implemented as a deterministic state machine on the order in which requests come in from the network, then its transfers and orders are instantaneous. The only thing you don't have on a centralized exchange is decentralization of the keys that control the deposited funds. But once again, a well-structured centralized exchange has automated multi-sig on every transaction.
I don't see how that impacts or how the unconfirmed transactions in Bitcoin would have any relation to what you just said.
One thing that we can do that centralized exchanges don't do is allow users to transfer deposits directly from one to another. Yeah, I log into Poloniex. I can't transfer the Bitcoin I have on Poloniex to another Poloniex user. Am I still cutting out?
No, you got it. So I understand that. But if somebody on the Bitcoin network tried to make available their Bitcoin on the BitShares network, and they transferred the coin within the Bitcoin network to do that, then it's not going to appear on the BitShares network until it's confirmed by the witnesses that say, hey, this is in fact happened. This guy did send the Bitcoin, and here it is locked up in collateral. So if that takes a long time to occur, then that will become obvious. I mean, obviously he transferred it to the BitShares network for a reason. And if he's going to sell something there or buy some service on the BitShares network, then that can't happen timely because of the problems with confirmation time.
I'd say look at it this way. Imagine everyone on the Bitcoin network could transfer their Bitcoin into the BitShares multi-sig, and then they could trade it just like they currently trade their Bitcoin. I'm not talking about in the markets. I'm talking about transfer. They can use it as a currency, just like they use Bitcoin as a currency. That's perfectly backed, still trust-free and decentralized. The impact will be that most people will find it more convenient to transfer their Bitcoin, leave it in BitShares, and then just use Bitcoin on BitShares as their preferred means of payment. And ultimately, BitShares multi-sig account would suck up all the Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin network wouldn't need to do anything anymore.
In a perfect world, but I see your point. I mean, I think it could work that way, but that's up to the market to decide. I was just looking at one specific element and one specific failure mode and contrasting
transaction fees too, like we've been discussing quite a bit lately. And we were to see something like an influx of that, would the network be able to handle like a very, very large influx of people buying BTC or sending their BTC over here to trade?
The BitShares network can easily handle the transaction volume of Bitcoin. It's only like 5 transactions a second. Come on now.
Well, yeah, I'm just making sure that, like, because I understand that the infrastructure itself can do that, but I don't know exactly where we are, or now I do. I didn't know exactly where we were as far as if the network has any bugs that seem like at this juncture, yeah, it might hold us back, or there might be some problems that pop up whenever we see that, as we generally do seem to see, like, you know, the quote unquote anomalies, I guess you could call them, in coding, that just, you know, there seems to be a bug here that we didn't even know existed, and now we do. I guess that's the question was, do you foresee that being a potential issue? Any like unforeseen bugs or things that need to be tightened up in the coding or anything?
All right, so here's some stuff to consider. Bitcoin on the BitShares network has very different properties than Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network. There is no Bitcoin script on the BitShares network, which means that any smart contracts that you do on Bitcoin with their scripting, whatever the limited non-Turing complete scripting language that they do have, you wouldn't be able to do those things with your Bitcoin on the BitShares network. Now, 99.9% of the people only use the multi-sig and or single signature transfers, and all the other crazy scripts that people are creating can be encapsulated either through custom operations or or not on the BitShares network. So from a strategy point of view, creating multi-sig for Bitcoin on BitShares that seamlessly converts the sidechain. BitShares might start out as a sidechain to Bitcoin, but at the end of the day, Bitcoin could be the sidechain to BitShares if we do this right. And as Stan pointed out, not just BitShares, but all altcoins could be migrated to a single blockchain, provided the only value the coin has is as a token. You can't migrate NXT to BitShares because NXT provides value on the next network for trading all their assets. But if all you have is a token, those tokens can be migrated to BitShares in a trust-free manner through multi-sig accounts. So I think this would be a very interesting ploy. And if we do it right and we market it right, we can say, hey, here's a solution to Bitcoin's transaction volume problem.
Crypto coup.
Yes. And in fact, you could even set it up so that the multi-sig authority is based upon the actual miners in Bitcoin. So if you give the Bitcoin miners a means of, every time they mine a block with a particular key in it, it counts toward increasing their weight in voting on the sidechain as well. Then you'd have the same users who are confirming blocks on Bitcoin also being the ones that are multi-sig signing stuff on BitShares. Now, why would the miners do that? They don't. If they wanted to increase transaction volume or do extra work, they would do that on Bitcoin and avoid the problem. So the only way to save Bitcoin is to give an alternative that is just as trustless, just as flexible, that doesn't require people to sacrifice their investment or speculatively trade out of Bitcoin, but still have all the benefits thereof. So I think there would be a lot easier to pitch merchants and Coinbase and Bitstamp to accept an IOU from this. And in fact, you might even be able to convince those parties to be a multi-sig signer on it. Now, you might have heard the news of the exchanges having a back-end network between all the exchanges, their own little private blockchain for inter-exchange settlement. Well, that's all this really is, ultimately. So Dan Notestein, I think, assuming Dan Test is Dan Notestein, this is there take about 3 months to do a BTC sidechain with multi-sig. So he could probably throw out $1 estimate on what 3 months
Are we talking
of
40-hour days? 40-hour weeks?
Other coins would be faster once you already supported one, he said. So depending on how much that costs, I'd say probably $100,000, $200,000. But he'd have to give you the actual conversion of time to money, because obviously he's working on multiple things other than this. So 3 months of scheduled time is not necessarily 3 months of full-time effort. But it is a big job. It's a big responsibility. It needs to be right, because if it's wrong, people lose Bitcoin. It's not like shares where we control the consensus and we can fix things. Actual Bitcoin can be lost if there are bugs in it. So and Dan pointed out the cost is just the time, though, since he's got a lot of intellectual property tied up in the existing code that he has. So he'd be effectively selling his interest in his current code by making it public.
Just so you know, we had a lot of talk about this sidechain idea recently. Also behind the scene, I was talking a lot with Stan and Michael. We kind of agreed that the term sidechain is a little misleading because it implies a complete decentralization. So instead of having a single point of failure as in centralized exchanges, we can't really go to fully decentralized solutions due to the limitations of Bitcoin. But there's a solution in the middle, which we just had described by Daniel, using a multi-signature scheme. And I wrote down a quick white paper kind of concept thing. We came up with a nice name for it. We called it the decentralized central bank, actually. And the idea works as follows, just so that you get a quick idea. For the customer, just deposits real Bitcoin on a regular exchange like OpenLedger or something. They don't get issued an IOU just from OpenLedger. Instead, OpenLedger takes the real Bitcoin, sends them over to a centrally managed, it's a multi-signature secured account that is controlled by many parties. In Bitcoin, it's probably like up to 15 parties. And every token that is part of that cold storage address, like a multi-signature secured address, every token in there has a counter token in BitShares. So it would be a 100% backed Bitcoin token backed by real Bitcoin in that cold storage address or multi-signature secured address. And these tokens are then transferred back to the exchanges, and they hand over these tokens to the customer. So this brings the advantage that people get an IOU from tokens that are secured by a multi-signature scheme. These IOUs can be exchanged into real Bitcoin using any exchange that builds on top of Bitcoin. So you can withdraw these IOUs from OpenLedger and trade them against real Bitcoin in block trades, because then they just take these IOUs, send them back to the central bank, so to speak, and get the real thing back. The whole idea is outlined in a little more detail in the paper I just linked in the comment box. So any input would be highly appreciated. The biggest I'm currently seeing are of the legal aspects, because these real Bitcoins have to be held by some real entities, I think. Yes, that would be an exchange union, but it would not be, I call it a central bank because the idea is the same as in traditional systems. You have a central bank, like the European Central Bank. They create money out of the backing from governments and hand over the money to other banks that then have it forwarded to customers, these banks being private banks. And instead of traditional banks, this central bank would be backed by 100% of the real asset they are creating. So they don't issue new shares based on trust, but based on the real tokens they have in their multi-signature secured address.
Who is the holders of? Who are the signatories in this clearinghouse multi-sig account?
It could be anyone. On the BitShares side, it could literally be a lot of people. I would propose to start with a set of people coming from committee members, witnesses, but also the exchanges themselves. They probably want to have a say in the central bank kind of thing. On the Bitcoin side, it's a little more difficult because you have a limitation of, I think, up to 15 public keys that you can have for a multi-signature scheme. So that would be a political issue to define who that would be.
I believe the actual limitation in Bitcoin is 15 signers. So your N is limited to 15, but M can be more.
Oh, that's nice. Good to know.
Which means you could probably have 15 out of 28 or 29.
Well, that's it's a political issue. Whoever controls that central bank clearinghouse account, that multi-sig account, that's very important. I mean, because that's the reserve bank, so to speak. So whoever controls it is king, and that's why it's important that somehow be decentralized. And so if it's going to be a multi-sig that controls that has the security is tied up in that, then how those people get to be in that multi-sig address is the key governance that needs to be looked at in terms of security.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also the other aspect is how do people change control of that multi-sig address? So in BitShares, it's really easy. You change the authority on the account and you're done. In Bitcoin, you have to transfer all outputs to a new output.
Yeah.
So it could result in some big transactions. But I think if there was a policy of every time you had 10 deposits, you merged them into one, you would automatically roll over and
you can of course also cascade things and have a cold storage with a different set of keys and a semi-cold storage that is used to interact with banks or the exchanges. And then, of course, what is also important is that all the exchanges can, of course, have their own hot wallets with their own funds. You know, they don't always need to contact the central bank or what was it here, the banking union. This is really just for the cold storage case. If you take a look at Kraken or something, their cold storage addresses are rarely used.
Yeah, from what you're really saying is that an exchange could accept a Bitcoin deposit or withdrawal as either real Bitcoin or as side Bitcoin, and it can treat them as completely fungible on their internal books, because they're redeemable. But yeah, anyway, this Mumble session's gone 15 minutes past the scheduled time. Is there anything else that people would like to discuss other than side chains?
There's one more thing I would like to bring out here because some might have missed it. We have had a proposal confirmed by the committee, and the result is that a lot of fees have been reduced drastically, most importantly, the transfer fees and the trading fees. So we are essentially the most competitive platform out there. Transfers are very cheap, especially for long-term lifetime members. And trading is currently almost for free, since we only ask for a fraction of BTS for create and cancel orders, and do currently not ask for any percentage of the filled order volume.
Well, let's do this.
This will be a perfect test for the case where lots of people have been calling for free transfers or reduced fee transfers to stimulate activity and trades and what have you. So the test begins. We'll see whether or not their theories play out to be actually beneficial or whether or not they're not going to matter at all. We'll just have to see.
If a fee is lowered in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did the fee really fall?
Exactly.
My point is that now that these fee changes have taken place, everyone who's dismissed us because of high fees needs to be notified of, hey, BitShares new lower fees. I could see a good way of getting that message out there is on CoinMarketCap, just having some kind of ad on there for a couple days, just advertising the new lower fees with BitShares, then anyone who thought we had high fees and visits CoinMarketCap that week will know that, hey, our fees are no longer high. Otherwise, everyone's going to assume our fees are still high and they won't show up.
Yeah, G Chicken says Daily D could advertise as well. This is a great idea.
I'm sure Amanda would be very amenable to adding that into her repertoire of BitShares sponsor token sound bites.
Is CryptoFresh currently down? Any word on what's going on?
It was up 10 minutes ago.
I was going to check on the status of worker voting, but I guess I can't do that now.
Well, I wanted to say something to everybody while we were all here. I was doing some calculations. I might be wrong here, but I read somewhere on the forums, and I don't remember who said it, but I remember it was somebody I trust in our forum. 5 BTS per second is what we have as far as what the worker pool gains so 5 BTS every second. Can somebody tell me if that's correct or not?
That's the spending rate limit coming out of the reserve pool.
Okay. So how much are we earning because with the prior calculation I did, it was 58,000 per day, but I was looking at a 5 BTS per second. Is that correct or incorrect? Okay, so $51,840 per month.
Yep.
Per 30-day month. I just wanted to get that out there because I think it's very important as we're looking at all these things that we start really looking into what can be built with this, and with what Bytemaster's been talking about being penny wise and pound foolish. It seems to make sense also to know what we're working with then, so we can be pound wise and penny wise at the same time. You know what I mean? So it looks like 51,840. Thanks, Xerox.
Of course, that number changes dramatically with market cap. So if we fall to 5 million, it'd be 25,000, and if we go to 20 million, it'd be 100,000. So
it sounds to me like that's a reason for us to use it while we have it.
Correct. And just to put things in perspective, so that people know how much money Cryptonomex is spending just to show up every month and just to pay 4 or 5. It's on the order of $30,000 to $40,000 a month, and these are all people that are working for Cryptonomex at below market wages for equity and things like that. So if 100% of the dilution was going to Cryptonomex, it would just barely cover our payroll, which means every month that goes by where we are not accepting dilution and we're working on stuff that BitShares is getting as much from us as it's paying out in dilution for free. So that's
huge.
Yeah. It's very expensive to hire engineers. You have 4 or 5 of them working full time. And that doesn't even, we're just talking salaries. We're not talking about office space and other expenses, legal fees, things like that. So, this is, sometimes it's helpful to view how much money does the blockchain have to spend versus how much money does it actually cost to fund our team, and then to also put that in perspective, well, how much money has our team taken from BitShares in the past couple months? And the reality is we haven't taken anywhere near as much as we've spent on improving BitShares these past several months. So any claims that we are sitting here milking BitShares are completely unfounded. We recognize that it's politically toxic for us to take money for ourselves, even though it might be the smart thing for the blockchain to fund us to actually work on this. But this is a big reason why I'm a proponent of paying for people like Abit and Roadscape and others to do things, SVK, to do things for the blockchain, because when they do something for the blockchain, it's more politically acceptable. So keep that in mind. And whenever someone complains about funding or complains about anything that Cryptonomex is doing with respect to BitShares, that we are giving to the BitShares community versus taking.
Well, one other thing that is important to also recognize is, and I've probably said this 3 or 4 times already in various hangouts, but for those who are not familiar with the fact, Blockstream is a company that's paying the Bitcoin core developers, and Ethereum has a company that's called Consensus who's paying their developers, and these are the core developers, and they're being paid by essentially companies that are owned by some people who have quite a bit of money. So, it's definitely a different place. BitShares is definitely a different ecosystem and has a lot of differences in terms of how this stuff is getting funded. And I have to give you credit, guys, because the core team for BitShares, I suspect, is probably going through some more difficulties than these other teams because they don't have, VCs backing them significantly, because it would be another politically dangerous move because of the politics of BitShares. But at the same time, right, we have the ability to fund CNX and all these other people who are working on the chain here. So I find myself thinking that this would be a great opportunity to consider, having CNX build some of this side chain functionality on and paying out of the blockchain. And I think if the community said yes, we want to do that, then I think politically we're looking at a good situation. Personally, just something to bring up. Anyway, we're sitting at 25 minutes over. Is everybody good for moving on to the after party so Bytemaster can get back to work?
All right, well, I'll catch you guys later. I'd like to thank everyone who's working in the BitShares community to make BitShares what it is. And I really think it's amazing and an honor to work with all y'all.